Welcome to the Healthcare Payment Network podcast. Why is paying and getting paid for healthcare so hard? Why is it unaffordable for most Americans? And most importantly, what are we going to do about it? Whether you're a provider or industry professional, ultimately we are all patients. This podcast is a conversation on how we tackle one of the most challenging problems in our society, paying for healthcare. Here we'll discuss new innovations and fresh perspectives from the people working to make paying for healthcare easier and more affordable. Let's dive in.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Healthcare Payment Network podcast. My name is Andy Rellihan. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at PayGround. And with me today is Joshua Silver, the founder and CEO of Rainforest. Joshua, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you, Andy.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thanks for joining. If you want to start, just give a little bit about your background, Rainforest, how you got this started, and where you guys are at today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I actually spent about a decade in the healthcare payment space previous to starting Rainforest. I started a company called PatientCo, which helped large health systems streamline all of their patient payment technology and billing technology. And that was a venture-backed business. And we ultimately grew that business and exited to a private equity firm who took it public. So really familiar with the patient payment space. Subsequent to that, Andy, I ran a consulting firm called Launchpath Group that was focused on helping software platforms with payment strategy and working with payment vendors. And on the heels of that, started Rainforest, which is a company that is focused on powering payments in a white labeled way for software platforms. Any software platform that wants to add payment processing to their capability set, we help them do it. We handle all of the payment topics like compliance and risk management so that the software company can focus on what they do best, which is building software. So eager to get into the conversation today on patient payments. Today, about a third of our business at Rainforest is healthcare. So even though I'm not focused on patient pay and healthcare payments 100% of the time, still spend quite a bit of time in that space.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great segue. Our topic today is key technical insights on payments. And one thing that stands out about your background is it's really always been in the payments industry and a lot of that within healthcare today. And maybe just start by saying what makes the payment process in healthcare unique, and what's unique to that versus other industry? You said a third. How do you guys see healthcare as a different vertical, and what are some of the challenges?
Yeah, healthcare does tend to be one of the more complex verticals to operate in. I think for a couple reasons. One, you have the disparity between the insurance payments and the patient payments. Other industries and retail, for example, there's no concept of insurance. You just go in and you buy what you're gonna buy, or in a restaurant, you go and pay for your food. In healthcare, though, you have this back and forth dance between the insurance company, what they're gonna pay, how much is left over that the patient's going to pay, or if the patient's is uninsured or underinsured. So that's kind of the first, I think, difference that exists in healthcare that doesn't in other industries. The second is there are a lot of different systems involved, as you know, in healthcare. You have the patient billing system, you have maybe a front-end patient portal that patients can pay with, you have a payment processor. All of these things need to stay in sync together. It's not like a dry cleaner where you go and you pick up your dry cleaning and you pay them $17 for your shirts and pants, and they don't need to record that receivable as having been paid and reconcile that against the bank and reconcile it against the payment processor. It's kind of a one and done shot. In healthcare, you have all this three-way reconciliation that has to happen between the bank and the processor and any other systems involved. Not to mention, you have a lot of complexity in the hierarchies of health systems. So you have hospitals that own physicians groups, you have physician groups that are part of larger groups, you have billing companies, you have management companies, and kind of every combination in between. That's not something that you tend to see as much in other industries. Sure, you may have, a franchise model for a restaurant or something of that nature, but it tends to be kind of one and done, or one level up, and that's about it. Healthcare has lots of different ways that those entities can be structured and ways that the funds need to flow. So it is really a pretty unique environment within the United States in terms of the payment ecosphere.
Yeah, yeah, we certainly feel that ourselves, right? You add in all of those things that you just said, which is just extra steps and layers to that exist within the US healthcare system, largely or not in other market verticals. And then you add in, there's not really a standard or uniform nature in which that reconciliation or the data gets to the patient, right? There's
Right.
as much as we're moving towards or trying to get to standards within healthcare, we run into other technologies all the time where they accept it this way, they don't accept this format. Like there's no uniform nature to how you get things back into the system in which a lot of these organizations operate. And so that's one of the big challenges that we deal with is, you've seen one billing system, you've seen one billing system, right?
Right.
Um, and so you started Patient Co and you sold that, and then now you've diversified. So Rainforest. So how long ago did you start Rainforest, and why did you start Rainforest? What was the genesis behind Rainforest?
Rainforest has been around almost 4 years now. We got started because I saw this market trend that was happening, which was payments used to be processed by banks. We go back 10, 15, 20 years, almost 100% of payment volume in the US was processed through to traditional payment processors and banks. Over the years, that volume has started to slowly shift over to software companies. Instead of a standalone terminal that your bank provides, payments are taken within the software company's platform. And in the recent years, that trend has really accelerated quite considerably. And in fact, by 2030, it's estimated that a full 70% of all payment volume will not be with banks anymore, but will be with software companies. And so that clearly is the wave of the future. At the same time, what I saw when I was consulting for many years was that the payment providers, the processors, and other payment entities didn't have good technology and didn't have the right operating model to be able to service these software companies effectively. You had a lot of large companies like WorldPay and TSYS and Global Payments that have been around for decades, are the result of a lot of M&A activity, legacy tech on top of legacy tech on top of legacy tech, surrounded by a lot of folks who maybe don't want to be there and aren't mission driven. They were kind of there through some acquisition along the line. That's not the type of environment, Andy, that's going to be conducive to a software platform that's bringing a modern offering to market. And so the whole thing, everything from the service model to the economics to the technology platform, had to be rethought from the ground up. And given how fast the market was shifting, I thought that it would be a great time to start Rainforest and really be able to leave our mark on the industry.
Yeah, kind of like a serial entrepreneur, right? You're in kind of business, what, three or four, or are there more behind this?
Yeah, I think I'm a glutton for punishment. I keep going into highly regulated businesses, Patient Co at the intersection of healthcare and financial technology. I don't think there's much more regulation you can pile on top of both of those regulatory regimes. So but we love solving complex problems. When you see the before and after of how complicated it was before and how simple it is after, there's just a lot of personal fulfillment and satisfaction I get by being able to
Yeah.
help so many people.
Well, and so payment certainly has PCI compliance, and that's a huge component.
Yeah.
You add in things like HIPAA, SOC 2, um, high trust in some
Yep.
instances, right? All things that are again, maybe not all of those are unique to healthcare, but certainly HIPAA and some of the other regulations around just working with not only payments, but payments and in healthcare adds
Yep.
additional complexity. And so how are you guys, or how do you think the industry should be tackling this, and what helps bring that modern platform as you just described?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say I'm a big believer in a lot of these regulations. I've seen so many data breaches over the years from different companies. I've been affected as a consumer. I've been affected by vendors we've worked with. So, data protection is one of those topics that's underinvested in and not talked about enough, but really needs to be more. It's pretty interesting. A lot of people kind of equate PCI and HIPAA as kind of the same thing. It's one's protecting financial data, the other's protecting patient medical data. In reality, while they're both data protection regimes, they actually, Andy, in a lot of ways couldn't be more different. In PCI, it's all about how do we make sure that the raw card numbers and sensitive information like security codes are never made available to anybody. Employees generally shouldn't ever have access. You shouldn't be able to decrypt them. You basically want to take it in once, encrypt it as fast as you can, and lock it away and never give access. And so it's a lot about access control. HIPAA, on the other side, is generally data that needs to be used, right? If your doctor is treating you, they need to see your medical records to know what's happening. If you're posting a payment into a patient record, you need to know what visit that was related to. And so, in a lot of ways, HIPAA data is meant to be seen by the right people in the right circumstances with the right permission, whereas PCI data should never be seen. And so, there's almost kind of this diametric opposition of kind of how you should think about things, even though people kind of always put them under the same umbrella of data protection. And I think they're actually very different. They do have some similar requirements around encryption and auditing and logging, but and the purpose is similar, but the kind of actual practicalities are very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And for many people that just want the modern experience can often feel like, it feels very nebulous on how you actually wrap your arms around it, right? And so what are some of the bigger challenges that you see with just if you're complying with one, both in healthcare or out? How is that best supported? And you're right, like the protection, it's not talked about enough. And we've seen in healthcare some really major significant data breaches,
Indeed.
not, across the spectrum in different areas, not just payments, but it's a growing issue, and hospitals, health systems, practices are responding with upping the ante and what they're requiring before you can, go in and be an approved vendor. So how do you wrap your arms around that? If you want to provide that modern experience, you want to provide the simplicity, but then there's all this complexity that goes in behind the scenes. What's the formula?
I think it all starts with having a good culture of compliance. That's something we talk a lot about here at Rainforest is, quality and compliance is really important. Every employee knows that from day one. Part of it is just our certifications we have and being SOC 2 compliant. We have to deal with regulations like AML, anti-money laundering, those types of things as well in the payment space. So there's a lot of training that happens. And if people are thinking about it day in and day out, oftentimes they will make good decisions on how to safeguard that information. I think the second thing is taking a pragmatic approach to how you deliver the technology. And one example at Rainforest, we help all of our software platforms stay safe from a PCI perspective because we have an embeddable component, like a little technology widget, if you will, that they can add into their platform. And that handles all of the sensitive information. So those card numbers never go through the servers of any of our software partners. It comes straight to us. And we're experts in data security. It's what we do all day long, every day, is safeguard that card information. We have experts on staff and go through rigorous audits and all of those types of things to do absolutely everything you can to safeguard that information. I don't always see software platforms choosing to utilize solutions like that. Sometimes they are either by choice or inadvertently still in scope, meaning they have access to raw card numbers, which is just never a good decision. And so it's about making sure that you're partnering with a good technology partner and then following the recommendations on how do you stay out of scope as much as possible. If you never have the data, there's no way for you to lose it. That's kind of the first principle, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in translation to your earlier point of if you're thinking about how you build all the compliance and the technology behind the scenes from the ground up, as you guys have, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier than to go deliver a modern native experience on the back end, which is ultimately what consumers want, right? As much as we all think that consumers really want, they want security, but they want ease. They want all the things that we've come to love with technology. And so blending those two things can be tricky, but that's why you all exist, right? To make sure that those things um, can happen, but they can happen safely and securely, which is so important.
Yeah, it's really all about trade-offs at the end of the day, right? You can the more friction you add, the more secure something's going to be, the less consumer friendly it's going to be. And so if you imagine kind of that slider along the spectrum of where is the right balance of safeguarding information, but also providing that good experience.
Yep.
We see that a lot even in the fraud space and risk management. My head of risk tells me all the time, she says, Joshua, I can have zero losses if you want. I just won't approve any transactions. We'll just reject them all and won't process anything. And clearly that's one extreme. And the other extreme is she says, I can get acceptance rates as high as you want, but you got to give me a higher risk allowance. And so the answer, of course, is somewhere in the middle, right? You've got to,
Yeah.
be mindful of risk losses, but also approving everything you can and not rejecting transactions erroneously that shouldn't be. And it is really challenging. And I'll tell you that also, I think we are about to see a massive shift as more and more AI is more cheaply available. And both in healthcare space and in the payment space, bad actors now have access to a lot of capabilities that they didn't even a year or two ago in terms of generating fake identities, generating fake documents, stealing people's information, all those types of things. I'm not seeing that be talked about very much in the healthcare space now as much as it should be, but changes are definitely going to be coming there.
Yeah. The role of AI has a lot of promise. It also comes with a lot of risk and a lot of anxiety around what it could do. You brought up a few points. What are some of the things you guys are seeing to protect against increased fraud or increased in a new AI world? How are you guys positioning yourselves for your software vendors?
Yeah, it is a bit of a game of whack-a-mole, right? You implement one new thing, and then bad actors will kind of figure out how to circumvent that, and you implement something else. A lot of it comes down to thinking outside the box. And so historically, 10 years ago, fraud and risk solutions generally you could do pretty heuristically. If this is an IP address from a certain country, or you have, X number of payments within so many minutes, you're hitting velocity checks, kind of very basic rules-based systems. Now, with how cheap AI has become and how easy it is to access this information, you can you need to employ new methods and be much smarter about it, using AI and machine learning on our side to make sure that we're catching things, looking at device biometrics. Is this an iPhone that we've seen before? Is this a phone that's been used to pay 12 different patients' bills? Well, that would be probably pretty unusual, something we'd want to
Mhm.
look at. Things of that nature become increasingly important. We look at even things like keystrokes. Is someone copying and pasting their birthday in? Generally, that would be pretty unusual. Whereas copying and pasting a bank account number would be way more usual. So those types of things are the things that you need to look at. Behavioral signals, device biometrics. Those signals need to be looked at much more than just very basic rule sets that you could rely on, as recently as 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that we talk about a lot, right? And it's always one of those things that you feel like you probably have never talked about it enough, or you're always worried, are we doing enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but pivoting to the experience of the patient, specifically tapping into your healthcare knowledge set,
Yeah.
what can a software vendor or a provider do to provide the optimal payment experience? What does that look like from a payment expert such as yourself? How would you describe that?
So that's a great question, and I'll answer it as a father and consumer myself. I've got some young kids, so as you might imagine, Andy, we've got lots of medical bills. It seems like one of them always is sick or has something going on. So we pay a lot of bills in our health in our household, and when I look at the spectrum of some folks that have really good technology, these are the health systems or doctors, and it's really easy. Maybe I scan a QR code on the bill. I can use Apple Pay to pay the bill on my phone, and it's done in about 15 to 20 seconds, and it's just paid, on one end of the spectrum. To the other end of the spectrum is maybe they don't even have online bill pay still in 2025, which is just shocking, but we still see some specialists who don't. And then, of course, there's everything in between. I think making sure that it's easy for patients to look up their bill, whether that's by an account number, a QR code, some unique identifier on the statement, a text message they got, getting access to the information to pay the bill. And then second, offering them lots of payment options. Some patients are going to want to pay with a credit card. Others are going to want a debit card. Patients may want to finance their bill if it's over a certain amount. Being able to use Apple Pay or Google Pay, other types of digital wallets, even PayPal. The more options you can offer to patients, it's about meeting them where they are. And one thing I've seen quite a bit is folks in the revenue cycle departments of health systems or practices think a lot about how they pay bills. And I like to remind people that you're not the average patient walking through the door. You're at a very different socioeconomic level. You probably have access to a lot of different technology. You have a way different understanding of how patient billing works and the difference between visit numbers and account numbers and MRN numbers and all these different identifiers coming out of the system. Patients are just confused. They just want to know, I owe this much. Why do I owe it? What are my options to pay and let me pay? And sometimes the complexity of the back office gets in the way of delivering just really simple solutions.
Yes. Oh, I would agree with that. And as a dad and payer of healthcare bills myself, right? And a lot of us here at PayGround, we're here because it's like, yep, we see it.
Yeah.
It's not solved, and it's it's painfully more complicated than it needs to be to just say, just give me something that's really simple and intuitive to use. And it's not consistent across venue, across experience. The other thing that's really unique about healthcare is oftentimes, especially if you have a more complex visit of care, that bill or bills is coming from more than one provider. And you may not even realize it, right?
I,
The person that
sure.
fixed your knee, well, the anesthesiologist is not employed by that same group. And patients are very, very unaware of that, right? You get into a major car accident, you have something like cancer, it's going to multiply by 10x, or it could multiply by 10x
Yep.
because you just don't know who may walk in for a consult to treat you. And that's a different bill because they were, a contracted provider that has privileges at the hospital. And so giving patients visibility, that's one of the big things for us is like, how do we go help blend all the things that you just talked about with security and privacy and ensuring things are really, really secure, and then taking that simplicity to the next level, because the optionality, the simplicity in the healthcare setting, the dimensions of what they may experience or encounter and the awareness of it is a huge, huge gap in the industry. And, as much as we are saying, hey, you know, we believe this is the problem, providers still ultimately just want to get paid. And so the
Right.
broader complexity, it's sometimes hard to feel if you're in the system itself, right? And so we wrestle with that a lot, right? Which is, what's the right time? How do we go meet providers where they're at as well, right? Because
Yep.
they're faced with a number of other challenges. Payments is one of a lot of challenges they have just to get paid for the services they're providing, right? So um, having simple, easy to use, intuitive technology to just process the payment where you're not getting bogged down with all the other dated legacy tech, is something that is a huge advantage that I don't think people quite fully wrap their heads around, right? And we do it too. We just say what's, processing can kind of feel commoditized. So this is my long-winded way of saying, how do you decommoditize processing? Because sometimes it feels like a commodity.
Yeah. Certainly, it has often been said that payment processing is a race to the bottom, and another way to say commoditization. What I've actually seen is that we're actually going the other direction. People have been burned by cheap solutions that don't work. And that could be there's technology limitations. It could be that there's risk limitations. It could be that the reconciliation doesn't work very well. People are increasingly willing to pay more for things that work better because they know every exception with a cheap solution is going to have to be worked by a very expensive human being who's going to go in and clean that up. And so if you can reduce exceptions, for example, that saves you a lot of money. And so is it worth paying, a fraction of a percent more on each payment to not have those exceptions? One of the really unique things we do at Rainforest is we have what we call penny perfect reconciliation, meaning our report, our core data set that says we deposited $1,000 in your bank account today, that is fully reconciled to the penny against all of the different payments, refunds, disputes, fees. We know about things like banking holidays, cutoffs with the timing cutoffs with the networks. And so when a provider or a merchant sees $1,000 in their bank account, they can pull up a report and see here's exactly what's comprised inside of that deposit. With other payment providers, maybe some who may be a bit cheaper, you don't have that, and so you're having to say, well, here's the report from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Let me add those three up. Does it equal my deposit on Monday? No, it still doesn't. Well, let me go account for the fees. It could take you an hour or two or three just to even reconcile the dollars you got in your bank account against what payments you received before you've even been able to auto post those. With Rainforest, that's a thing of the past. It just goes in, it's always reconciled fully. You have the full accounting for it. So that's just one small example, Andy, of where value is being created in the payment space and something that you might consider commoditized.
Oh, that's a great example. And the race to the bottom is certainly a term that we've heard before when talking about it, and would agree. There's a market out there for things that just make your life easier, make things easier. And we certainly value your partnership because you guys are with us along our journey as well as we're trying to provide a solution to healthcare. And so maybe as we wrap here, what's one piece of advice we haven't touched on today on if you're going to go implement payments as a provider or maybe even another technology provider, what's one piece of advice that you would give to people getting into healthcare and in the payment space?
In this day and age, which is with as much conversation as we have about technology, it should all still be about the people. Who do you want on the other end of the line when there's a problem? Because there's always a problem, right? There's always something, there's always a tweak you're going to need to make. There's always an improvement you want to make. It may not be a problem, it may be an opportunity, but who do you want on the other end of the line? Is that company a good company to work with? Do they have a good track record? Are they trustworthy? Are they going to bill properly? Are they responsive? And do you matter to them as a client? Whether you're a provider selecting a billing technology company or a software company choosing a payments partner, it really doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that you're working with great people. If you do that and the service is great, everything else tends to work out.
Great advice. Joshua, thank you for joining us today. And good luck to Rainforest as you guys continue to grow and continue on your journey.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Healthcare Payment Network podcast. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and valuable. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your network. Stay connected, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the future of healthcare payments.